tucked into the far northwest corner of DuPage County, Illinois, bordering the Cook County Panhandle to the north and the Pate Phillips, Illinois State Park and Kane County to the west, lies the Pratts-wayne Woods Forest Preserve, by far the largest forest preserve in DuPage County, as well as one of the newest, with most of its land acquisition coming in the 1980s and 1990s. With an asymmetric geometry stretching almost 3,500 acres in size, the Forest Preserve property spans 4.5 miles north-south from Illinois Route 64 all the way to the Cook County line, and reaches 3 miles east-west from Illinois Route 59 to the Kane County line. The preserve is dominated by small lakes and wetlands, primarily from the Brewster Creek watershed, with the creek meandering east to west and draining into the Fox River 3 miles further west. Brewster Creek takes its name from the Brewster family, early settlers of Kane County, through whose property the creek ran, with Charles Brewster establishing a sawmill in the middle of the 19th century, using the creek's water to power the mill.
The preserve's fen and meadows are home to many native fauna, including deer, raccoons, skunk, fox, and coyotes, as well as birds such as sandhill cranes, sparrows, bitterns, and blackbirds. The preserve's long north-south span and adjacency to the Pate Phillips State Park and the Heron Woods State Habitat further north serves as an important north-south corridor for migrating wildlife. For us humans, the preserve offers nature trails, fishing, camping, and even a model aircraft area for model planes and drones. The popular Illinois Prairie Path traverses over 3 miles through the Forest Preserve, from south of Smith Road all the way to Dunham Road in the northwest.
Following the acquisition of much of the Forest Preserve's land in the 1980s and 1990s, the district created a plan to restore the once lush natural wetlands set amidst the rolling prairie of northern Illinois. Wetlands restoration projects began in the late 1990s, starting on the southern portion of the Pratts-wayne Woods. Restoration included removal of miles of drain tiles installed by farmers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, also removal of invasive species such as buckthorn, and reseeding with native marshland plants which had a natural ability to hold on to water, to slow its path through the landscape, and to better manage water runoff during heavy rainfall and snowmelt.
The restoration also attracted the attention of scientists from Illinois universities and the Illinois State Geological Survey. Owing to its proximity to the new Pate Phillips State Park, then known as the Tri-County State Park, and the vast open acreage of the Pratts-wayne Woods Forest Preserve, they saw the Brewster Creek wetland as an opportunity to more closely examine the geology and environment of a prairie wetland, an ancient remnant of the glacial exodus of more than 10,000 years ago.
Preliminary test pits of the Brewster Creek sediments were opened in the summer of 2002, when the DuPage County Forest Preserve was assessing the potential impacts of their proposed wetland restorations, revealing thick layers of peat and marled clay and remnants of ancient forests, radiocarbon dated to more than 10,000 years before the present. Scientists quickly realized that the Brewster Creek layers represented a detailed picture of the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, a period when the world was going through a rapid climate change, from cooler to warmer temperatures, similar to what is happening today.
In 2003, the formal Brewster Creek study was undertaken by Brandon Curry of the Illinois State Geological Survey, Eric Grimm, formerly of the Illinois State Museum, Jennifer Slate of Northeastern Illinois University, and Mike Conan of Northern Illinois University. They dug test pits and cored borings in more than a dozen sites within the Brewster Creek wetland north of Stearns Road, primarily in a north-south sampling, roughly 1,000 feet in length and 300 feet in width. In addition to the detailed stratigraphies resulting from their borings, one of their test pits yielded the remarkable find of a beaver-gnawed spruce branch, which was later radiocarbon dated to a calibrated age of 12,800 years to 12,900 years before the present.
The accumulated profiles and stratigraphies from the Brewster Creek investigation resulted in an exhaustive analysis of the ancient environment and wetland, from 10,000 years to 16,000 years before the present, representing a detailed study of the site's geology and biology, including assays of pollen, ostracods, and diatoms. They were to publish their detailed results a few years later in 2007, but had to amend their paper mid-flight when a surprising new discovery emerged from the Brewster Creek watershed, less than a few thousand feet from where their initial test pits and borings were taken.
By 2004 and 2005, the Forest Preserve's Wetland Restoration Project had moved to the northernmost tracts of the pratts-wayne Woods Preserve and the Brewster Creek watershed, with the typical pattern of drain tile removal, landscaping to wetland contours and drainage, removal of invasive species, and the reseeding of the area with native marshland plant species. It was during the final stages of this project, in the late summer of 2005, on August 30th, while reseeding the area, that Daniel Terpstra, a newer employee of Applied Ecological Services, noticed 3 large chunks of blackened material sitting atop the recently landscaped earth. The objects were quite heavy, weighing several pounds each and covered in dirt. But from their first appearance, he thought they were some sort of burnt plastic that had been carbonized in a fire, debris that needed to be removed from the natural setting of the marsh. Terpstra, who had only recently graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a Bachelor of Science in Biology, examined them more closely and strongly suspected them to be teeth of an extinct Proboscidean, a mammoth or a mastodon. He also noticed a few other objects amidst the soil that resembled bones or bone fragments.
Terpstra immediately contacted Leslie Burns, the DuPage County Forest Preserve's Natural Resources Supervisor. Burns was then able to contact scientists at the Illinois State Museum in Springfield, Illinois, and the Illinois State Geological Survey, some of whom were concluding their detailed environmental study of the Brewster Creek watershed. Within days, Terpstra accompanied Jeffrey Saunders and Eric Grimm, a paleontologist and botanist from the Illinois State Museum, along with Brandon Curry from the Illinois State Geological Survey, to the location where the discovery had been made.
As we've discussed in previous videos, the teeth of Proboscideans are highly diagnostic in revealing the specific genus and family of the deceased animal. And Saunders was able to quickly identify the 3 found teeth as being from a mastodon, the Mammoth americanum, the same species as the perimastodon found in northern Glen Ellen in 1963. Saunders could also tell that the teeth were from an adult mastodon and were molars from the upper left and upper right jaw of the deceased animal.
They soon had a backhoe at the site, along with a small crew of DuPage County Forest Preserve staff, opening up a trench approximately 100 feet by 100 feet in dimension, or 30 meters by 30 meters, and a few feet in depth. As the first few feet of soil had already been highly disturbed by the recent landscaping and removal of clay tiles, as well as the installation of drain tiles decades earlier, they could safely use the backhoe to quickly scrape away the highly disturbed soil, getting them close to the hopefully less disturbed bone layers.
Curry and Grimm, meanwhile, investigated the soil stratigraphy, and based upon their earlier detailed test pits and borings, were able to quickly determine that the teeth and bone material were lying in a peat layer, 3 to 4 feet thick, overlying a gray silt layer. However, even this thick peat layer was found to be significantly disturbed by the aforementioned human activities of the past 100 or more years. As a result, much of what they were able to find of the mastodon skeleton was highly fragmented, bits and pieces of tusk and bone, likely chewed up by unforgiving trenching equipment that was designed to break through soil, wood, and even stone.
Even so, within this disturbed peat, they were able to find dozens of tusk fragments, one several inches across, as well as an intact but highly fragile rib bone, sandwiched between ancient wood branches. Finding the rib amidst wood branches proved fortuitous, as it meant that they could radiocarbon date both the rib bone as well as the adjacent wood branches to more precisely hone in on the mastodon's death.
The 2005 salvage excavation lasted only a matter of days. Unlike the Perry Mastodon dig in Glen Ellen and the Blackwell Mammoth dig near Warrenville, this excavation, while in progress, was not publicized to the local press, and so no large crowds of people descended on the spot to watch the dig in action. The DuPage County Forest Preserve decided to keep things under wraps until they could ascertain the nature of the finds, as well as how they intended to proceed. Although they had opened up a very large excavation pit, more than twice the size of the 1977 Blackwell Mammoth pit, they quickly came to realize that whatever remained of the mastodon skeleton had been highly compromised over the past century, as evidenced by the soil disturbances and fragmentary nature of the finds. If there was more to be found, it was either further afield or in a very poor state of preservation. And so with the excavation closed down, during the first week of October, the DuPage County Forest Preserve District announced the mastodon finds to the press, with newspapers reporting the discovery over the ensuing days and weeks.
Radiocarbon dating results for the mastodon bone came to light a short time later, indicating an age of approximately 11,500 years before the present. The calibrated age of the mastodon bone, based on corrections from dendrochronology and other dating methods, came back with a 95% confidence interval of between 13,200 years to 13,400 years before the present, with the present being the reference date of 1950. These results were published in 2007 by the Illinois State Geological Survey in a paper written by B. Brandon Curry, Eric Grimm, Jennifer Slate, Barbara Hansen, and Michael Conan, titled The Late Glacial and Early Holocene Geology, Paleoecology, and Paleohydrology of the Brewster Creek Site.
Finding the funding for additional excavation and research on the newly discovered Brewster Creek Mastodon was going to be a difficult path. The initial finds were fragmentary and not particularly unusual, as teeth and fragments of tusk and bone, for both mastodon and mammoths, have periodically turned up in the U.S. since the earliest records of European settlement, and scientific grants are usually not given out to benefit such sparse and tenuous finds. From the beginning, however, the DuPage County Forest Preserve had something else in mind for this mastodon discovery, seeing this instead as an opportunity for education and public engagement.
Using the Brewster Creek Mastodon as the focal point, in 2007 the DuPage County Forest Preserve District, working in collaboration with the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, initiated a 2-week summer camp educational program dubbed the Mastodon Camp, scheduled in late July and early August, and for local high school students and teachers. The camp was staffed by DuPage County Forest Preserve naturalists and Field Museum paleontologists, and funded by government educational grants, the Field Museum, and DuPage County Forest Preserve fundraising. Although the program received numerous applications in the spring of 2007, only about 30 high school students and 10 teachers were selected in early June to participate in the 2007 camp, all of whom had to pass through a highly selective application process, including essays and interviews.
To help identify the best places to dig for possible mastodon remains, Field Museum paleontologists used ground-penetrating radar, or geophysics, to select and plan the excavation trenches. After a few days of training, the camp participants were assigned square plots to carefully excavate, layer by layer. Under the shade of tents, the gaze of onlookers, and the oversight of professionals, the camp participants managed to excavate more than 500 bone and tusk fragments from the peaty soils. At the same time, they learned about ancient fauna, Ice Age geology, and the principles and methods of paleontology under the tutelage of experts from local colleges, universities, and museums, such as Dr. Stephen Mosier of Wheaton College.
The DuPage County Forest Preserve and Field Museum built on the success of the 2007 Mastodon Camp with a reprise in the summer of 2008, staging a very similar program, and once again drawing in about 30 local high school students and 10 local teachers to participate. The camp also drew in members of Asconi, the Earth Science Club of Northern Illinois. The 2008 camp was marked by a particularly rainy period, and much time and energy was spent bailing water from the shallow excavation pits. As in 2007, there were no major skeletal finds, but additional bone and tusk fragments were added to the collection representing the Brewster Creek Mastodon, presumed to be a single specimen. The 2008 camp also unearthed copious fragments of wood and seeds from ancient black spruce trees, adding to the overall picture of the Ice Age Brewster Creek environment.
But perhaps due to the paucity of finds, rising expenses, and priorities elsewhere, the following summer the Field Museum withdrew from the project. So in 2009, the DuPage County Forest Preserve decided to change things up for the Mastodon Camp. And thus, in its final form, the Mastodon Camp turned into a 2-day weekend program, open to all ages 10 and up, with an open registration on a first-come, first-served basis.
The Brewster Creek Geology and Environmental Study of 2002 to 2004 provided one of the most comprehensive views of the local environment in northeastern Illinois in the late Pleistocene and early Holocene epochs. The evidence clearly indicated a few periods of climactic fluctuation during this transition, the climate oscillating from cold to warm, from warm to cold, and finally to warm again. During the interglacial period of the Pleistocene to the Holocene, these transitional phases are referred to as the Older Dryas and Younger Dryas periods, respectively.
The Brewster Creek site was initially a kettle, a glacially formed lake, but it was also fed by groundwater springs, which helped to buffer and stabilize the local ecology during some of the many climactic fluctuations. The wetland was part of the outwash deposit of the Woodstock Moraine. A moraine consists of large deposits of gravel and sand that were heaped in a conveyor belt action at the edge of the glaciers. There are dozens of such massive moraines spread across the face of north and central Illinois, representing the edge of glaciers at various points in time. The Woodstock Moraine has been radiocarbon dated at 18,000 calibrated years before the present.
The study showed that black spruce and black ash were the abundant species in the early forests that chased the glaciers northward, trailing the grassy tundra in the Older Dryas period, with deciduous trees such as oak, elm, larch, and hickory encroaching in the Younger Dryas. The study also tells us that as the Brewster Creek kettle filled in over time, unconformities resulted, places where greater deposits of fine sand would accumulate, and which often served to snag and concentrate both small and large fossils, such as snails and even mastodon bones.
Related to their different feeding habits in forest or tundra, mastodons and mammoths may also have had different social behaviors. Like modern proboscideans, such as African and Asian elephants, woolly mammoths likely moved in herds of 5 to 20 individuals, and were likely led by matriarchs, the oldest and most powerful female of the herd. On the open tundra, living in larger groups provided protection against predators, with many eyes and ears being available to scan for threats to the group. Due to these herding habits, scientists refer to mammoths as being gregarious animals. Mastodons, however, may have lived in smaller groups, perhaps with a handful of companions, as there was less advantage to more sets of eyes within the closed spaces of a forest.
And why is it that the 3 Proboscidean specimens that have been found within DuPage County share the trait of having been found within ancient wetlands? The simplest and most likely explanation is related to the topic of taphonomy, which we discussed in the Blackwell Mammoth video. Recall that taphonomy is the study of what happens to animals and their remains once an animal dies. The science of taphonomy tells us that animals that died exposed, on dry ground, would have typically been scavenged by predators and insects, and decayed by worms and bacteria, such that decades later there was often little or nothing to be found of the animal. On the other hand, for animals that died in or near the water, and whose skeletons were then covered over by silt and peat, much of their skeleton was spared decomposition due to the anaerobic or oxygen-free conditions beneath the peat and clay. Hence, marshes and wetlands significantly increase the odds of preservation and long-term survival of the animal's skeleton.
The science related to mastodons and mammoths has continued to develop. For example, in 2016, an ambitious study was published by several regional scientists, including Christopher Widga, Stacy Lengill, Jeffrey Saunders, Greg Hodgkins, Douglas Walker, and Alan Wanamaker, entitled Late Pleistocene Proboscidean Population Dynamics in the North American Continent. This study was based on a very large sampling of mastodon and mammoth remains found throughout the mid-continent of the USA. In this paper, the authors utilized a data set of over 1,600 mastodon and mammoth specimens from 12 states and over 600 locations. For the study, many of the specimens were resampled for more up-to-date and accurate radiocarbon dating.
This larger study indicated that during the last glacial maximum, from 16,000 to 22,000 years before the present, which consisted of an arid climate and a mixed spruce and tundra ecosystem, mammoth specimens were most prevalent in the region. However, mastodon specimens dominated in the periods thereafter, when spruce and black ash forests covered much of the area. Mammoths nonetheless persisted in this mixed ecosystem for thousands of years, suggesting that mammoths were more adaptable to different habitats than originally thought.
The latest mammoth specimen to be found in the region was dated at 13,400 to 13,000 calibrated years before the present, and was found in Berrien County, Michigan, while the latest mastodon specimen to be found was from Richland County, Wisconsin, and dated to 12,800 to 12,600 calibrated years before the present, suggesting that mastodons outlived mammoths by at least a few hundred years in the area. But an important note from their study is that mammoths died off gradually, their population slowly reducing over 1,000 years or more. Mastodon populations, on the other hand, appeared to have crashed dramatically within the span of a few hundred years, even while their population range was expanding.
The cause of both mammoth and mastodon regional extinctions are still unclear. There is little evidence for human hunting and butchering of these specimens, with well below 1% of the specimens and sites in the dataset showing definitive human activities. There's also very little evidence for large predators playing a role, with only a few specimens showing predator modifications, such as gnawing of the bones. But this may have been partly due to the paucity of large carnivores in the region during this time frame. However, the final die-off of these animals did appear to coincide with the beginning of the Younger Dryas period, a cold period that lasted more than 1,000 years, one of the multiple temperature oscillations of the Pleistocene to Holocene transition. The authors suggest that this rapid climate transition, coupled with the absence of large predators in the area, may have played a role in their regional extinction. Without such predators, Proboscidean populations grew unchecked, at a time when food resources were plentiful during a warm interval. When the climate again shifted cooler abruptly, as happened during the Younger Dryas, the overpopulation at a time of sudden food scarcity could have resulted in massive die-offs.
The artifacts recovered during the 2005 to 2008 Brewster Creek Mastodon excavations are currently stored at the DuPage County Forest Preserve's Maze Lake Peabody Estate in Oak Brook. Earlier this year, DuPage County Forest Preserve curator Dennis Buck was kind enough to take us on a tour of their archival storage facility in the 1919 Tudor Revival Mansion, built by Francis Peabody, later owned by the Franciscan Province of the Sacred Heart Order of Friars. The Brewster Creek Mastodon artifacts are tucked away on Spartan metal shelving in a small room on the upper floors of the mansion, where much of the archival and curation work for the DuPage County Forest Preserve is realized.
The prizes of the Brewster Creek Mastodon collection are 3 teeth, each weighing several pounds, with some blackened enamel still adhering to their dappled crowns. As mentioned earlier, Jeffrey Saunders of the Illinois State Museum had previously identified these as belonging to an adult mastodon specimen, molars from the upper right and upper left jaws, originally set in the maxilla of the mastodon skull. No teeth from the mandible or lower jaw of the mastodon were found. The DuPage County Forest Preserve collection also includes a few large tusk fragments, bone fragments, black spruce cones, as well as samples of preserved wood, including spruce and larch, found alongside the mastodon remains.
There are as yet only limited plans to display the Brewster Creek Mastodon remains to the public, although they frequently accompany DuPage County Forest Preserve naturalists for educational programs at DuPage County schools and public gatherings. In the meantime, some of the materials will be loaned out to local museums, such as the Elmhurst History Museum.
You can access the Brewster Creek Mastodon site today by visiting the northern portion of the Pratts-wayne Woods Forest Preserve, north of Stearns Road. Via the Illinois Prairie Path, follow the signs for the Stearns Road Trail, heading east from the path roundabout near the intersection of Dunham Road and Stearns Road. The shared parking area for the James Pate Phillips State Park and Pratts-wayne Woods Forest Preserve is a little more than a half mile to the east. By automobile, from the west or east, travel along Stearns Road, Illinois Route 29, to the entrance for the James Pate Phillips State Park, situated on the north side of Stearns Road, in Bartlett, Illinois, about midway between Dunham Road to the west and Powys Road to the east. Follow the signs to the right for the picnic area and trails. Continue on this asphalt road until you come to a large oval loop. You can park your car in the parking area to the west of this loop, as the site is just to the northwest of this parking area.
The Brewster Creek Mastodon location is the most challenging DuPage Proboscidean site to access, not in terms of distance, but in terms of the difficulty of the hike from the parking area. There are no trails that will take you close to the site, and so you will likely have to blaze your own. The small trek involves hiking about 1,000 feet northwest of the drive loop through tall grasses, bramble, and vines, with little shade from the sun. It's not a difficult hike, but you'll want to come prepared with proper hiking shoes and clothing, possibly a walking stick, as the vines tend to grab at your feet. Pushing your way through the prairie and the fen foliage will tire you more quickly than you'd think.
While walking through the high prairie grasses, you'll pass beneath power lines perched high atop 60-foot-tall electric transmission towers. The power towers run just to the north and west of the site from the ComEd and Exelon electric substations, about a half-mile due east of the site. The Mastodon site, which encompassed a few hundred square meters over the course of 2 or 3 digging seasons, is located roughly along where the imaginary lines, drawn from the second electric tower on the northern perimeter and the first electric tower on the western perimeter, intersect.
On one of our recent visits to the site, we spoke with retired DuPage County Forest Preserve naturalist Jack MacRae, who talked about his first-hand experience with the Brewster Creek Mastodon site. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about your background with the DuPage County Forest Preserve?
I was hired by the Forest Preserve in 1996 as part of their Natural Areas Management Program.
What role did you play in the Pratt-wayne Mastodon excavation?
I had done a lot of programs with the Blackwell mammoth, with the Forest Preserve. And so when this animal was found out here in 2005, I was one of the people who was involved from the very beginning on what to do with this discovery.
Can you tell us a little bit about the site, its topography, and the discovery of the mastodon?
It's an old soybean field, acres, hundreds of acres, being cropland for decades. The Forest Preserve, part of their management program when they acquired the land, was to restore it back to a natural community. The first thing they had to do was dig up the old drainage tiles And it was while they were digging up drainage tiles and restoring the vegetation that when somebody found a tooth of a mastodon. And I was contacted, I think, that afternoon.
Jack, what local institutions did the DuPage County Forest Preserve partner with while doing this excavation and the subsequent activities?
Forest Preserve and Field Museum were the primary groups out here when we did the public activities.
Okay.
The Illinois State Museum came out early on, and we're doing the real scientific work of looking at the soil cores and what type of vegetation was here. They're taking pollen samples from different depths and just trying to get the age of what type of vegetation was here and what time period we're looking at.
Jack, what does the Pratt-wayne Mastodon finds, as well as the other Proboscidean finds in the area, tell us about the environment and the megafauna of northeastern Illinois 10,000 to 13,000 years ago?
This is right at the end of the Ice Age. The Ice Age had just ended. It's starting to go into one of the interglacial periods where things are warmer like they are now. It seems like the habitat changed. At that time, the vegetation changed around here, northeastern Illinois, and the mammoths, the mastodons, some of the other large Pleistocene mammals went extinct. Now, it's easy to say that it was habitat loss because their habitat did change here, but their habitat didn't change up near Hudson Bay or Alaska or Siberia. So there's plenty of good mastodon mammoth habitat up there, but they still went extinct. Now, this area was completely different 12,000 years ago. Much more like the middle of Canada. It's not tundra. We weren't buried under a mile of glacier, but it was much cooler. The vegetation was the same as you'd find in the more boreal forest. Lots of spruce, lots of sedges. They're able to look at exactly the changes in vegetation over time by looking at the seeds and the pollen. And so they can see when the spruce forest disappeared, when it was replaced by oak, when the grasses started to move in and more of a prairie environment. And so they can look at that time period, the last 18,000 years, real clearly, and come up with that we know exactly when the vegetation changed, and we can know exactly when the prehistoric elephants disappeared from this area.
Jack, can you comment on the challenge of the DuPage County Forest Preserve and not only preservation of these sites, but also public access to important sites like the Pratt-wayne Mastodon?
The Forest Preserve has been real good at being able to direct where their visitors go. We know that we're a real popular recreational entity. If we put parking lots, we put trails into an area, people are going to go to that area. Conversely, if we want to protect an area, we don't put in a parking lot, we don't put in a trail going directly to that site. We're able to control where most of our visitors go. We're able to protect our high quality natural areas, but we're also able to provide visitors all the joys that come with a forest preserve. When I started working, and there was a big project about a large purchase and where the trails should go. And one of the commissioners at that time said that we have to put trails in because people have to see what they've just bought. And that stuck with me, that you need to have public access to get support for what we do. But if you want to protect an area, a high quality marsh, a place where a mastodon was found, you just don't put trails to that spot.
Jack, thank you very much for being with us today and for teaching us about this very important site.
Certainly, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Today, the Brewster Creek Mastodon site is at the edge of a recovering wetland, after more than 100 years under the plow. Looking about here and there, trees and bushes pepper the area. In between, a patchwork quilt of wild prairie grasses and marshland plants, with colorful names such as Great Angelica, Marsh Marigold, and Spotted Joe Pye, convene and riot in the intervening spaces. There may as yet be more bones of the Brewster Creek Mastodon, buried deep beneath the peat and silts of these marshlands. But it is more likely that most of the animal's remains have long since been destroyed by previous human activities.
In this series, we've explored 3 ancient DuPage elephants, drawn upon the expansive palimpsest of the northern Illinois prairie. set upon the harrowing by enormous glaciers, and left behind at the end of the Pleistocene. Separated by less than 12 miles on land, these three animals were nonetheless removed from each other in time, with the Brewster Creek Mastodon being the youngest, the Prairie Mastodon a few hundred years older, and the Blackwell Mammoth a few thousand years older still.
By the time of the Perry and Brewster Creek Mastodons, woolly mammoths may still have roamed the spruce forests of northern Illinois, but in fewer and fewer numbers, and would have been on the very precipice of local extinction. Mastodons were to live on in the area for a few hundred years longer, but their days were numbered as well. A few humans may have also begun to filter into the area, just as the mastodons faded, perhaps in pursuit of game that abounded in the fen. Today, monumental transmission towers, tethered across the countryside, stand watch over the Brewster Creek wetlands, unlikely sentinels of the residual world of the Pleistocene. Although we may be separated from this somewhat foreign landscape by the gulf of more than 10,000 years, we are nonetheless linked back to that age by the shared uncertainty of a climate in rapid transition.